This is Gran Turismo 7, the latest entry in one of the longest running brands in sim racing history. GT7 finally delivers on the VR experience that was only teased back on the original PSVR with GT Sport. Racing and car enthusiasts, stick around because this is something truly special and sets a new benchmark for all VR racing games to come. Hey guys, it's Chris from the VR Grid, and I must apologize as I have been sick for the last few weeks and my voice has been toast, so bear with me as I try to bark out this review that I have had in the works for, well, almost since the launch week of PSVR 2. And with that being said, welcome to what will be a first of many PSVR 2 reviews from yours truly. If you like this video, guys, give it a like for us, and if you're interested in more VR content, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss new videos as they drop. As a day one PSVR owner, I have been a fan of the GT series for all its ups and downs. Launching first on the original PlayStation back in 1997, there had simply never been a racing game that took such painstaking efforts to offer up a true driving simulator while simultaneously being a love letter to automobiles and the world of racing. Throughout the following 25 years, countless racing sims have established themselves on both PC and console, and the GT series has at times struggled to keep up, especially where physics and engine sounds were concerned. However, GT founder, producer, and lead designer Kazunori Yamauchi and his team have, with Gran Turismo 7, once again helped define what a console-based sim racing title should be. And with GT7 finally being brought fully into VR, this truly feels like Kazunori has finally seen his true vision for the Gran Turismo series become a reality. Jumping first into the content side of the game, GT7 is packed with something for just about any type of racing fan, offering up over 400 photoreal automobiles and 40 plus tracks, the majority of which are laser scanned for accuracy. Single player and multiplayer racing options are almost endless, but be aware, in true Gran Turismo fashion, most of the game's content is locked behind the game's version of a campaign, which is referred to as a cafe here in GT7. In what I found kind of an odd choice, GT7 has turned game progression into a selection of what they call menus, of which are offered at the cafe and are essentially a collection of challenges designed to take you through the game's many features, such as using your garage, purchasing vehicles, upgrading and tuning said vehicles, as well as an introduction to the game's deep livery editor and store options. And that's just the beginning. Future menus will take you through the license process. Yep. You need to get good before you can get the keys to anything faster than your mom's 4-cylinder grocery getter. Earning licenses unlocks access to higher tiers of cars, at which point the cafe will start offering up menus introducing you to a variety of driving disciplines and eras of automobile racing. It is also around this point, maybe an hour into crushing through menus, that you gain access to the online feature of the game. So for those anxious to jump in and race with your friends, just know that you will need to put some time in first. And don't expect to at first join your friends with much to race either, as there's no car rental option. But more on the multiplayer lobby a little bit later. I will say that continued progression through the cafe was an appreciated feature that was sorely missing in GT Sport, and most sim racing titles for that matter, as I love that the game gave me a more tangible reason and guide to not only race, but what to race, giving a good overview of different tracks, times of day, weather conditions, and of course, a selection of car choices I might not have naturally gravitated to. That being said, I can see more casual racers finding this a bit of a grind. However, players who push through the cafe menus will not only unlock all the game's tracks, but also the ability to sell your own cars, in addition to gaining access to the Legend Car Dealership, a sales center that contains some of the most sought-after classic cars in GT Sport, offering vehicles simply not available in the used car or brand dealerships. Further to this, completing menus earns players not only cash money, but awards them with an automobile often related to the menu at hand, and often a much sought-after vehicle, making the time and expense usually worth it, and consequently setting players up with a fairly robust and varied car collection to play with either on or offline. Finally, simply racing and completing menus or taking on one of the game's many challenge stages earns players XP, which will award players with roulette table spins of various values, each paying out either a car, a part, or a sum of cash. And in such GT fashion, sometimes you just win the opportunity to go pay for a car. Simply put, GT7 does a nice job of consistently rewarding players for simply playing it, extending this reward system into literally every time you race, whether solo or in an arcade race, custom race, or time trial run, or any of the game's many cups, all available within each available track. You can even earn XP and money setting up or joining custom races in the online lobby. An addition I absolutely loved as it made even a night ripping around tracks with friends a money earning opportunity. And it's a good thing too, because the economy system in GT7 is definitely a little hard on the player, with cars costing into the tens of millions, and upgrades to a car easily putting you back a couple $100,000. Speaking of upgrades, GT7 brings back the full-on upgrade system from previous titles and then some, allowing players to effectively rebuild and tune a car to their own specifications. Engine modifications, weight reductions, body kits, and complete engine swaps are just some of the changes players can make, not to mention tire changes, rim swaps, and a deep livery design system that includes an online marketplace for those looking to distribute or simply download designs for both vehicles and racing gear. And let me tell you, never in my racing history have paint jobs and car designs been so fun to play with and customize on my rides. For whether I was gushing over my own rides in the incredible VR showcase mode or racing against people online, never have I felt such a personal identity with my rides, knowing people would be checking it out inch by inch in VR, almost like I was really at a car show. It's an incredible feeling and one very unique to my experience in GT7 and VR. Now, it must be mentioned that yes, GT7 does have microtransactions still, and the grind to earn real money does at times feel like it lends itself to push players to spend real world money to get ahead. However, the addition of being able to sell used cars certainly helps to offset the sense of pay to win that can hang over the game at times. Looking at the multiplayer offering for a moment, GT7 offers two very robust options found in the form of the online multiplayer lobbies and sport mode, GT7's online ranked league system we first saw introduced in the series' previous entry. The online multiplayer lobbies are for more casual players looking to jump quickly into races or start up their own lobby with a bunch of friends. Here, races can be customized across just about every attribute imaginable, making for a near endless choice of races. Thankfully, the VR version of GT7 is cross-play with any flat gamers, making it easy to play with friends not in VR. Now, on the other side of the multiplayer offering, we have that sport mode, in many ways Gran Turismo's answer to iRacing. Here, players are ranked on skill and sportsmanship and matched with similar racers, making for highly competitive races that are really meant for those looking for serious races, void of players crashing into others and not following track rules. Now, while the Gran Turismo series has been a staple of the sim racing world on consoles for decades, like many other sim titles, I always felt that the series struggled in communicating a real sense of speed to players, in combination with a physics model that never quite managed to nail the feeling of traction loss, or more importantly, the moments leading up to it. The result was gameplay that often left players, especially unaccustomed to the series, flying into corners at high speeds and spinning out at even the slightest turn or braking point. Thankfully, here in GT7, a new tire physics model changes the whole feel of the game, making it much easier to regain and keep control of vehicles. Now, I'm not saying you won't be licking the walls half the time, but at least you'll know it was your fault. Now, as for communicating a proper sense of speed to players, this is where being in VR completely and fundamentally changes the entire racing experience. Literally sitting in the car surrounded by the depth of stereoscopic VR is a game changer in racing games. Cars now feel like they have real mass and weight, as players can actually feel the body roll of their vehicle and the scale of competitors next to them. More importantly, the overall sense of depth and scale communicated to the player gives a real-world sense of how fast you're actually moving through it. Braking points begin to feel more organic as well, as players begin to learn a real sense of braking speed as it relates to distance, instead of simply trying to use landmarks to remember braking points. The end result is VR makes racing in GT7 not only much more immersive and fun, but also easier. Now, I'm certainly not saying this is easy, as GT7 can still very much be the Dark Souls of racing games, but VR can make it slightly more accessible. Thankfully, the basics are taught throughout the early menus, so players looking to spend more time racing and less time tweaking can, for the most part, get away with a basic understanding of car upgrades and a familiarity with some of the various driving assists on offer. However, for those looking for more like myself, the rabbit hole can go very deep, offering players the ability to completely tune vehicles, track driving telemetry, fuel and tire usage, and immerse themselves completely in the fine details of the racing world. And for me, that in itself is the brilliance of GT7, as it can truly be a game for anyone, lending itself to players who simply want to run track days, create liveries, and take pictures of their rides, just as aptly as it can facilitate a deep racing career to those who would rather crush out an actual 24-hour Le Mans race on their racing rig. Furthering GT7's open appeal to various types of racers is the absolute insane level of detail that goes into each and every vehicle found in the game. Something the Forza series has suffered from is offering a huge car selection, but often being very hit and miss on the quality of vehicle reproduction, with many handling very differently than their real-life counterparts and often feeling like simple copy and pastes of other vehicles. Here, GT7 excels, offering an at times insane level of detail and nuance to car handling, making each and every vehicle in its collection a genuine love letter to that specific car. This is a game where players are really rewarded for taking the time to learn a vehicle and develop a driving style around it, learning specific courses and truly mastering aspects of the game that appeal to them. Adding to the wide range of vehicles and driving disciplines is the game's wide range of courses, ranging from famous race courses and road courses, highway driving, rally dirt courses, and pretty much everything in between, including some classic fictional GT courses like Trial Mountain and Dragon Trail, which are given quite the upgrade here in GT7. Hardcore sim racers who swear by the subscription-based game iRacing may not find GT7 to be hardcore sim enough for them, but there's no denying the incredible balance Polyphony has found between offering a high level of simulation and the amount of content on offer. Personally, I always found the GT series to be almost clinical in its approach to racing and the way cars felt on the road. I thought the driving model felt stiff, with cars never feeling as exciting to drive and throttle down on as was portrayed in real racing or other games for that matter. Thankfully, what began with GT Sport and continues here is an overall physics engine that finally makes these high-powered vehicles feel powerful, lively, and predictable, and unpredictable when necessary, and most importantly, fast and fun. In fact, as an avid racing fan and one who leans more towards the sim side of things, I would say this is easily one of my favorite racing games in and out of VR. This level of excitement on the track is also communicated beautifully through the PS5 DualSense controller, giving players an incredible sense of feedback previously only possible with a force feedback steering wheel. Braking strength, traction loss, gear shifting, and other road changes are all communicated wonderfully through the combination of the controller's HD rumble and haptic triggers, so much so that it is one of the few racing games that I didn't immediately want to plug into my racing rig. That being said, if you're lucky enough to have a proper force feedback wheel setup, GT7 will impress you with some very tasteful and informative wheel feedback, and of course, offer some next level immersion to the VR experience. Speaking of controllers, I should mention though that the game does not support the two PSVR 2 motion controllers, so there is no in-game VR controls, something which is standard among all major VR sim racing games, as you simply need the higher fidelity control of a wheel or analog stick. Closing things out on the gameplay side of things, I should mention the racing AI, as I feel that Polyphony has done a nice job of really dialing in the difficulty levels here, offering more intermediate difficulty levels that don't feel stupid, but certainly don't push the envelope, allowing early racers to feel proud of some early wins. However, higher difficulties close that gap nicely while also turning up driver aggression, meaning if you get rammy on the course, expect to be put in your place. Of course, more experienced racers will undoubtedly end up online for the highest challenge, but the AI driving here at its highest difficulty is often very competent and adaptable, never screaming that it's a computer-controlled opponent. Getting into the virtual side of things, I mean, what else can you say other than GT7 in VR is an absolute sight to see in the headset. As someone whose first VR driving experience was Drive Club VR on the PSVR 1, I remember instantly feeling that this was going to be the only way to play a racing game moving forward. However, I did look longingly at PC VR racing games like the Project Cars series, Dirt Rally, and Assetto Corsa, and longed for that next level of visual immersion. Dirt Rally would eventually come to the PSVR, and it was incredible, but it was still visually filled with compromises. Finally, I would get a PC, and yes, games like Project Cars 2, a modded Assetto Corsa, and a few others blew my mind, with a level of AAA graphics I had only dreamed about on the PSVR 1, which had only teased it with the likes of GT Sport's limited VR mode. I mentioned my little VR racing journey to you all because I want to tell you that despite my PC VR racing experiences, I was absolutely blown away when jumping into GT7 VR for the first time. To be straight up, as someone who has endlessly tweaked with graphical settings to get even my high-end PC to run a visually stunning game like Project Cars 2 properly, with a smooth frame rate, with all the visual effects on, I was amazed at what Polyphony has managed to pull off with the PSVR 2, powered by a PS5. I mean, truly and incredibly, this is not a VR version of GT7, this is GT7 in VR. Taking full advantage of the dynamic foveated rendering technology that eye tracking offers, GT7 somehow has managed to find a perfect blend of resolution and high frame rate, while keeping most if not all the flat game's lighting and particle effects complete with full texture detail of both the cars, inside and out, and the tracks. Nighttime racing in an open cockpit is a straight up religious experience and is sure to make even the most jaded VR gamer tear up up with its beauty as they rip through tree-lined courses, headlights bouncing off trees, then looking up to see a wide-open star-filled sky. Not to mention the excellent use of the deep blacks of the OLED display and HDR lighting, making sparks and headlights truly blinding. Jumping between various courses, vehicles, and racing throughout different times of day and all the types of weather is truly an experience in VR, as they all feel so unique and literally game-changing. Case in point, jumping from an F1 car to a 60s muscle car, a supercar, and then into a go-kart made every single experience feel completely unique, and much of this had to do with the fact that I was literally in these vehicles, in these worlds, and they felt real. Every single detail of these vehicles has been brought into VR, and dare I say, they begin to get close to being photoreal, or about as photoreal as this current tech will allow. However, like I said, it is the on-track experience that continually impresses me, as it is silky smooth and simply beautiful across all the tracks, all the cars, every time of day, all weather conditions, and online with up to 16 players. It's truly remarkable. But to be fair, the graphics aren't without a few flaws. Some slight pop-in can be seen if you're looking for it, with some texture flicker. Draw distance is very good for VR, though the game still has some limitations when comparing it to the flat version, with the image being a bit softer as you look a ways off. Now, probably the two most noticeable visual aspects to mention are directly related to the amazing tech the PSVR 2 uses to actually pull this off. First off is the use of dynamic foveated rendering, meaning you really need to dial in that eye tracking, IPD, and headset placement on your face for the best results, resulting in a relatively small sweet spot to get the full visual experience. Related to this, GT7 is not as sharp as some PC VR racers, especially if they're using super sampling, likely not maxing out this headset's resolution capabilities, but close enough, especially when taking into account the amount of effects on screen and the smooth as butter frame rate. However, this frame rate does come at a cost, as GT7 uses a reprojection technique that essentially takes the game running natively at 60 FPS and doubles it to that silky smooth 120 FPS we see in the headset. The result though is a slight ghosting effect that thankfully isn't too noticeable in GT7, but is noticeable from time to time, especially when whipping your head around quickly or when viewing a competitor's vehicle driving across you left to right. Something that became quite noticeable when driving around my friends in multiplayer. You will never see this issue recorded in footage though, as it is only visible in the headset. And finally, that much talked about Mora effect that the PSVR 2 headset is unfortunately becoming known for due to its use of OLED panels. Essentially, an almost screen door effect, but not a screen door effect, can be seen here in GT7, especially when looking at skylines. Regardless, once in a race and focusing on the corners, my car, and competitors, I rarely notice these things. In fact, despite these small gripes that I mentioned, I would still say that pound for pound, GT7 in VR is the best looking VR racer that I've ever played. Sound-wise, GT7 also flexes those AAA muscles, delivering some of the finest engine sounds in the franchise history, and especially when considering how many vehicles have been uniquely created here. It may not hit the highs on a car-by-car basis of some more specialized racers like Assetto Corsa Competizione, but it remains a very solid sound package that I gladly turn the music off to immerse myself in. Additionally, upgrades to your vehicles, whether it be to the exhaust or the inclusion of a turbo or supercharger, can change the sound of vehicles, and these are the types of details I expect in a proper simulation. The GT series wasn't always known for its accurate engine sounds in previous numbered entries in the series, so it's nice to see it back on top here, even if it lacks some of the finer details found in some sim racers. Additionally, for those looking to get the best sound experience here, be sure to plug in some earphones, as the 3D audio mix here in GT7 is also first rate and does a brilliant job of properly communicating vehicles coming up behind. Music, well, personally, I turn off the soundtrack as I came here for the cars, but if you know Gran Turismo, then you know to expect a combination of alt-rock and underground EDM, along with some jazz and classical music tracks thrown in because it's Gran Turismo, and it has always thought itself as the tuxedo of racing titles. And that brings me to my final thoughts and review score. As a game, I would confidently say that GT7 is currently the finest example of a sim racing title made for the masses. Hardcore sim racers are sure to find GT7 a little too forgiving in certain areas, but like I said, this is a racing sim that still attempts to be accessible to a general audience and does successfully manage to find a balance between hardcore sim and being simply fun. As a VR game, GT7 is easily one of the PSVR 2's finest launch titles, as its execution is truly remarkable for a game running on a console, and yet competing with, if not besting, some of the finest PC VR racers currently available. The VR Grid gives GT7 a perfect 10 out of 10. For me, GT7 is the complete racing experience, a must-own for racing fans, and honestly, one of my favorite VR games of all time. And that's it for us, guys. Obviously, I love this game. Maybe you don't agree. Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you like this video, and don't forget to consider subscribing for more VR goodness. And one more time, I'm sorry you had to listen to my crackly voice, but thanks for sticking around.